There is a quiet shame that follows every failed attempt at change, making you feel as though you're fundamentally broken. You might call it a lack of discipline, laziness, or weakness, but the truth is often more tender. The self you are trying to be still feels foreign to you. You aren't failing because you lack control. You are failing because you are trying to behave like someone you don't yet believe you are. We often treat discipline as a cure for disconnection, hoping that if we force ourselves hard enough, we will finally belong to the version of ourselves we dream of becoming. However, the problem is not effort, but identity. When your conscious mind builds a plan that your unconscious does not recognize, the psyche revolts, not to sabotage you, but to protect you. Every pattern of behavior, even the ones you hate, once served to keep you safe. You cannot simply tear these patterns away. You have to understand who they were built to protect. For instance, the person who procrastinates often isn't lazy. They are protecting themselves from exposure. To act means to be seen and evaluated, risking the feeling of inadequacy. This resistance is what is known as a complex, a cluster of memories, emotions, and meanings around an old wound. When you try to change behavior without healing the complex underneath, your own psyche drags you back to safety, even if that safety hurts. Discipline without identity is essentially violence. You are asking yourself to fight the part of you that still believes it is unworthy of change. This resistance is actually a form of loyalty to the person you once had to be to survive. Real transformation begins when you stop trying to control the symptom and start listening to it. Procrastination, avoidance, and inconsistency are messages from the unconscious saying, "Something in me doesn't feel safe becoming this new person." Until you translate that message, your actions will always return to what your identity allows. Identity is not what you say you are. It is what your nervous system believes you are safe being. You can declare that you are disciplined, but if your deeper self associates discipline with pressure, criticism, or shame, your body will not follow. It will distract and dissolve your efforts to protect you from what it perceives as danger. You become disciplined only when the version of you that resists finally feels seen. When the part of you afraid of change is met with understanding instead of judgment, your unconscious stops fighting and starts helping. We must recognize that what we repress does not disappear, it becomes shadow. The harder you push to fix yourself without integrating your shadow, the louder it protests. The path forward is not domination, but dialogue. You must ask your resistance what it is trying to protect you from. You might find that your resistance fears that success will lead to higher expectations, or that changing will cause you to outgrow the people who once made you feel loved. When you listen with compassion, the resistance softens because it no longer needs to scream to be heard. To change your identity is not to erase your past, but to include it. It is to build a new self that honors why the old self existed. This is what it means to be whole rather than good. Discipline focuses on goodness, control, and performance. Wholeness is about truth, integration, and aliveness. The disciplined person says, "I must do this," while the integrated person says, "This is who I am." One fights the self, while the other evolves it. The shift happens quietly as you stop forcing habits and start embodying new meanings. You no longer wake up early because you should, but because it feels natural for someone who values peace. Discipline is a finite resource that eventually tires, but identity runs on belief, which is self-reinforcing. Every action that aligns with who you believe you are strengthens that identity. You don't need discipline to change. You need permission to be someone new. That permission comes from intimacy, the quiet understanding between your conscious and unconscious selves that you no longer need to hide from each other. When you stop forcing yourself to evolve and start listening to the parts that resist, a subtle peace appears. You find coherence where your actions and your identity begin to speak the same language. Effort no longer feels like a fight, it feels like remembering who you were always meant to be. However, there is a strange grief in letting go of who you used to be, not because that version was perfect, but because it was familiar. It is the self that carried you through confusion and built defenses when no one else protected you. The psyche mourns what it outgrows. Real change often feels heavy because you are not just forming a habit, you are burying an old self. Individuation is the lifelong process of reconciling what you show the world with what you hide. Control isolates you from your center because the unconscious speaks in symbols and images, not schedules and demands. When you try to dominate yourself, you create tension that leaks out as fatigue and resentment. Pressure does not produce freedom, it produces compliance, which is always temporary. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This fate is really your self-concept looping. You cannot discipline survival responses out of yourself. You can only love them into safety. The moment you start including these parts, fear turns into awareness and resistance turns into intuition. Procrastination might be whispering that you are scared of being judged, while distraction murmurs that you don't feel connected to your work. These are not flaws to fix, but languages to decode. Becoming a new identity means losing the rewards of the old one. If you stop being the rescuer, people may stop depending on you. If you stop being the victim, sympathy fades. This is the sacred confusion before rebirth, the night sea journey where the ego dies slightly so the self can be born. Growth rarely feels like progress, it feels like dissolution. You won't find motivation in this silence, but you will find the new identity starting to whisper. It arrives through small choices that feel peaceful instead of forced. The moment you stop rejecting who you were is the moment you become who you are meant to be. Your psyche finally exhales because there is no longer a war between who you are and who you should be. Transformation feels like a reunion where you realize you were never meant to climb to your best self, but to remove what blocks you from remembering it. Change doesn't begin with a declaration, but with a quiet noticing. That noticing is the seed of a new identity. Eventually, striving dissolves, and you find yourself safe inside your own rhythm. You move slower, but each movement feels true. Discipline was just the bridge to trust, a language you needed until your self-trust could form its own words. Becoming whole is not a final version of yourself, but an ongoing conversation between what is known and what is still becoming. It is an inner yes, echoing softly beneath your skin.